And welcome to our session on becoming anti-racist lawyers. We want to make clear this session is for all lawyers and future lawyers. You don't have to already be a public interest lawyer. You don't have to want to be a public interest lawyer. You don't have to be a social justice warrior already to be an anti-racist lawyer. Anti-racist lawyers are at corporate law firms. They are in-house counsel at businesses. They're government attorneys. They are law professors. They are compliance professionals. They are politicians. They are judges. They run the full gamut. You name it. Anti-racist lawyers can be anywhere. And in this session, we're going to share a few foundational lessons for becoming an anti-racist lawyer. And we actually hope to have a really robust discussion after our introductory lessons. So we hope that you actually open up and show your wonderful faces so that we can actually engage each other directly and build trust during our conversations in this 1 hour session. We begin first by defining a few key terms that any anti-racist should know and understand. And thereafter, we're going to share 7 principles or core tenets of critical race theory that should undergird or guide your thinking as an anti-racist lawyer. And after that, we want to walk through a few steps of awareness and recognition and the kinds of questions and actions you should be thinking about as you engage in your work as an anti-racist lawyer, both in your actual practice and in your workplace, in creating an anti-racist space in your workplace. And then finally, we want to offer a few hypothetical scenarios for discussion. And we really hope that you engage deeply in this discussion. And we encourage you to speak and to offer your insights. All right. So first, what is race? I don't know if Cecily is can speak now or here. We'll talk about race. And so there are 2 sociologists, Michael Omi and Howard Wynand, who wrote this really great book, if you haven't read it, on racial formation, who describe the process of racial formation as a socio-historical process by which race is created, shaped, and transformed by social and political forces. And they say that in turn then creates racial and cultural meaning, right? Race, they say, is a social construction, right? It's not a real thing. There's no gene that people who are belonging to or identify as part of all one race share, right? It is something that has been socially defined, but it has real meaning, right? So the great example I like to use is, right, a dollar bill. If I look at a dollar bill, if I look at money, it has no meaning, inherent meaning. It has a socially constructed meaning. But it has real consequences. I can't pick up this white piece of paper and say all of a sudden I'm going to write $5 bill on it and then use that $5 bill in a store. And there are real consequences that come with that social meaning. In fact, Omi and Wynand define race as, quote, an unstable and decentered complex of social meanings constantly being transformed by political struggle. So it's constantly being transformed. The fact that it's a social construction means that people are defined differently, racially, in different countries, in different spaces, and it has different meanings in different spaces, right? So example is people who would be considered to be, for example, although it's changing in the United States, Black in this country might be considered to be colored in
Hello?
South Africa.
I'm so sorry, Michael. Thanks for helping me.
Oh, great. Cecily, we can hear you now. And our amazing colleague, new colleague at BU, Boston University, who literally wrote the book on how to be an anti-racist, defines race as, quote, the power construct of collected or merged differences that live socially. And I'll move on to Cecily, who can talk about, so what is racism? Begin our discussion on what is racism. Did we lose her?
Cecily, take off your mute.
So I'm working with Cecily to see if we can get her video going right now.
Okay.
So do you need her on? Because we could just have her chat while we work.
No, we could continue to go.
Okay.
So we'll talk about racism, and we're talking about a variety of racism. Kendi says racism is sort of a marriage of racist policies, racist ideas, and that all produces and normalizes racial inequalities. And what does that mean? We want to break that down. And racism adapts itself over time. So what most people think of as racism is what we call Jim Crow racism, right? And Jim Crow racism is a racial ideology that basically overtly explains that the social and economic standing of people of color is the result of those people's biological, intellectual, moral inferiority. That was Jim Crow racism. Jim Crow racism was upfront and blatant. It is what people think of when they think of the no Black people allowed signs, the water fountains, right? Or I don't like you because you belong to this particular group. I'm not going to hire you because you belong to this particular group. That's Jim Crow racism. But in our post-civil rights era, most people know they can't engage in, or most people know that it's not socially acceptable to be a Jim Crow racist. And so most people don't consciously have those kinds of views. Racism is much more subtle. It's less likely to be outwardly racial. It's more likely to be it's more likely to be non-conscious. It's also what many people miss. It's also institutional. It's also structural, right? Eduardo Bonilla Silva has a wonderful definition. If you read his wonderful book, Racism Without Racist, Colorblind Racism and the Persistence of Racial Inequality in America, he defines colorblind racism. And he says it's a racial ideology whereby individuals rationalize people of color's contemporary status in society as being the result of market dynamics, naturally occurring phenomena, and the imputed cultural limitations of particular racial groups. So, for example, you consider statements where people might say the high poverty rate of Latinx people is the result of a relaxed work ethic, or the high poverty rate of African Americans is a result of a relaxed work ethic, or something along those lines, right? Or consider statements where people often will talk about either residential segregation or people's relationships, intimate relationships, as a result of natural tendencies among groups. Natural tendencies among groups to want to live among each other or to want to be attracted to each other. Describe those things as natural. Bonilla Silva says that colorblind racism otherizes more softly, right? So instead of proclaiming that interracial marriage is wrong on a straight racial basis, people might say, well, I'm really worried about the children. They're going to use something that is not outwardly racist to explain why they feel the way they do. Ian Henny Lopez, in his book on dog whistle politics, right, talks about common sense racism. And common sense racism is a racial ideology whereby racial stereotypes or myths, inequalities are presumed to be natural, meaning individuals view these stereotypes, these myths, these inequalities, inequities as being just what they are. They're widely known, they're widely recognized, and they're not needing any further explanation because they're just common sense. They just kind of exist that way. Right? So consider some of the arguments that people have made about why we need to have tough immigration laws. And it's sort of just like, it's common sense that we need to have tough immigration laws to ensure that hardworking citizens of the United States are protected from people coming from countries that are overrun with drugs and criminals, or from terrorists who might want to harm good law-abiding American citizens, right? Those kinds of rationales. So now that we've defined racism, what does it mean to be a racist? And what does it mean to be an anti-racist? And we've pulled these definitions directly from our wonderful colleague, Dr. Ibram Kendi, who says a racist, what does it mean to be a racist? A racist is someone who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction, or expressing a racist idea. And an anti-racist is exactly the opposite. Someone who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. He says a racist is somebody who believes that problems are rooted in groups of people, right? Blaming the people, blaming their culture, blaming their action, while an anti-racist locates the roots and problems in policies and in power. A racist would allow racial inequities to persevere, and an anti-racist wants to confront them and to think about the structures that enable them and begin to deconstruct them. Right, and so to be racist means that you're constantly trying to exonerate, to avoid changing policies, changing ideas, changing personhood, things that might actually change the status quo. And racist policies, he said, include any measure that produce or sustain racial inequity between racial groups, and anti-racist policies do the opposite. And a racist idea is any idea that suggests that one group is inferior or superior to another racial group in any way, right? And racist ideas argue that the inferiorities and superiorities of racial groups explain racial inequities in society, right? So imagine somebody who says, right, that you have whites who dominate as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies because they're intellectually superior, smarter, right, have earned all those butts. And then somebody might then turn around in another racist idea to say that, for example, African Americans have dominated in basketball or in football because they are naturally inclined to be right to be better in those sports, right? So both of those ideas are racist ideas, right? So with that, I'm going to turn over to Professor Gonzales Rose, who would talk about a CRT, give us a CRT primer.
Absolutely. So now, having defined what race and racism are, I want to provide some tools for understanding the basic principles of critical race theory, because critical race theory can be a lens to reveal racism. So here, thinking of it as these tools, and I often teach my students these 7 P's of critical race theory principles. So we have power, purpose, privilege, property, permanence, pervasiveness, and perspectives. Now there's overlap here, but sometimes pulling out these tools to a situation, when you're looking at an action, you're looking at a policy, or if you're looking at something that's a practice or an inaction, you can use these tools to reveal racism. So the first one I want to talk about here is power, and that's the power behind racialization. At its core, critical race theory views the problem of racism and the problem of racial differentiation as inextricably linked to power. It's this idea that there are insiders and there are outsiders, and legal and other institutions are skewed in favor of the insiders, that they're structurally designed to keep the insiders in power. So ask, how does this policy, this practice, or this inaction keep a group in power? And here we're often talking about the racially privileged group of white Americans. There's also the purpose of racism. So here, the purpose of racial differentiation is to confer privilege onto the insider group. And this can be compared to the outsider group, who is often structurally subordinated here. So privilege becomes one of our important P's here. Now, as my dean said here, racism is not just limited to dislike of a group, right? That's Jim Crow racism. But here, racism is more about maintaining white privilege rather than dislike of a group. So the dichotomy here becomes more of the privileged versus a group that's being racially subordinated. It's not so much the historical Jim Crow oppressor versus oppressed. So here, what you can do when you're using your privilege lens is to ask who benefits, and also then to think about how these benefits can be distributed more equitably across society. So here, also start noticing how whiteness becomes a norm, and imagine how the norms might be different if all of society was included. And then this brings to another P, which is the property of whiteness. So this idea that whiteness is not merely a preferred racial designation, or even just treated as a norm, that it is a form of property. And this is something that Cheryl Harris all educated us on in her important work. And I'll quote some of her work here, where she talks about the law's construction of whiteness defined and affirmed critical aspects of identity. So here, who is white? Of privilege, what benefits accrue to that status, and of property. And they're meaning what legal entitlements arise from that status. So here, property is not merely a tangible thing, but it's also a right or an expectation of rights. So you can ask, is whiteness being treated as a right? Is it being treated as an expectation of a right warranting certain treatment? And it's important to know that there are both material and psychic consequences to race and racism. Here, Du Bois referred to the psychic value of whiteness as psychological wages of whiteness. And our colleague, Dr. Kendi, has explained that, quote, racist ideas make white people think more of themselves, which further attracts attract them to racist ideas. Now, on the flip side, racist ideas make people of color can think less of themselves, which makes them more vulnerable to racist ideas. So there is this impact there. Two related concepts that I want to also run down, really brought to light by Derek Bell, is the permanence of racism and the pervasiveness of racism. So as Derek Bell observed, racism is an integral, permanent, and indestructible component of the society. There aren't any quick fixes, right? Brown versus Board of Education and having Barack Obama as president, this clearly did not eradicate racism in the United States. Further, racism is pervasive, right? Racism has become or is the norm of American society. People of color face racism every single day as part of their everyday life. Racism is often ignored unless it manifests in its most egregious forms. But even then, even the reason we're here, right, having a teach-in about racialized police killings is one of the big motivators, right, for us, our presence here. Even that, so egregious state violence, that can be somehow justifications given, excuses given. And finally, perspectives of color. Often there is an absence of perspectives of color. So always asking, are diverse voices included and heard? Who crafted the policy, the practice at issue? And would it look different if people of color were decision makers or policy makers? So those are just a few things to think about when you're constructing and looking to evaluate whether racism is present.
Right. Of course, our question is, what should one do? How does one become an anti-racist lawyer? And the first step, of course, is that one has to acknowledge, right, that we all engage in racism, that one has to acknowledge that we have to educate ourselves about racism, and we have to accept the ways in which we perpetuate racism in society. As Professor Gonzales Rose just pointed out, racism is not extraordinary. It's pervasive. It's part of the norm in our society. It's not abnormal at all. We want it to be abnormal. That's our goal. And racism, it's everywhere. It's embedded in our institutions. It's in our structures. It's in our minds, whether consciously or non-consciously. And it is, in some cases, it's even in our hearts, right? Our colleague, again, will point to him, Dr. Kendi has famously noted, right? This is why it's important for us to accept and to recognize the ways in which we help to perpetuate racism. He's noted that denial is the heartbeat of racism. Our denial is what keeps racism alive. Many of us we can call out racism when we see other people, other institutions, other people's family members engaging in it or participating in it or facilitating it. And yet we fail to see the racism within our own families, within ourselves, within our own institutions, within our own workplaces, within anything that connects to us. And to be an anti-racist lawyer, we have to be willing to engage in the very, very difficult work of looking within, of questioning our own thoughts and action, of questioning the thoughts and actions of those who are closest to us, and in questioning the practices, the policies, the actions of the institutions and the organizations to which we belong, and for whom we work, and for whom we volunteer.
So maybe now I'll go into the second step of being an anti-racist lawyer. So the second step of being an anti-racist lawyer is to recognize, as Dr. Kendi asserts, there is no neutrality in the struggle against racism. There is no being not racist, and I know we got a question about that. One is either racist or he would contend anti-racist. Racism or racist is not a slur. It is merely a descriptive. Again, to quote our colleague, Dr. Kendi, we can be racist 1 minute and then in a different action, anti-racist the next minute. So what we say about race, what we do about race in each moment determines what, not who we are, right? It's about defining the behavior and the conduct at that moment and whether we're engaging in a way that is racist or whether we're engaging in a way to fight against the racism that's embedded in our society. And now we will go to Professor Gonzales Rose, who I think will tell us about the third step in being an anti-racist lawyer.
Absolutely. So the third step is to understand that one must approach the law and your work critically. Understand that as you learn really how to immerse yourself, and I think a lot of this starts in law school. And so I know that we have a lot of several law students who are here. And especially when you're thinking about evaluating cases and so forth, this becomes very important. Often you're going to see claims of neutrality, realizing that, again, the law is not neutral. Rather, the law often is replicating, perpetuating racism. So in many instances, privileges, we'll see that racism is being privileged over other narratives. So really paying attention to the narrative, looking for the set of unexamined cultural beliefs that are structuring the narrative that is forming in a case. Often we'll see a majority opinion that seems like it's using one set of facts, and then you get to the dissent and suddenly another set of facts. Perhaps race or class or gender really takes a center role in maybe the dissent that we didn't see. And as an evidence teacher and scholar, I often think about how evidence rules are shaping the facts that fact finders hear. But also another layer is the choices that decision makers, such as judges, employ to determine what facts will be determinative. So how a story is told can change substantive outcomes.
Alrighty. So how do you engage with cases? How do you engage with legal statutes? How do you engage with your legal work when you are trying to be an anti-racist lawyer? And we wanted to share a few questions that we think that you should be asking yourselves as you're reading cases, in particular, or when you're reading any kind of legal document or policy document. Michael, that first slide would be great at this point. Right. So the questions, of course, as Professor Gonzales Rose just pointed out, who is the person who's speaking? Who's the person who's deciding what's important and what's not important, what's factually relevant or not relevant is really critical. So you want to know, what are the identity characteristics of the person, of the opinion author, of the person who wrote the statute, the person who wrote the opinion, the person who wrote the policy? From whose lens are we seeing this case? From whose lens are we seeing the facts? And then we want to ask ourselves, what are the unexamined cultural beliefs that are underlying their understanding and their narration of the facts? We want to see, even as we're reading, who are the witnesses, right? Who are the attorneys? All those people matter, right? And how that narrative is told, and as we found out before, how that narrative is told affects the outcome. Who participated in the creation of the narrative and the opinion, in the telling of all the parts? Who had voice, right? And how was that voice built and constructed? And then whose voices and perspectives are missing in this narrative, and why are they missing? Are there other questions that should have been asked in this case? And would critical issues of evidence, would they have been defined differently if those missing voices had been included And would points of comparison in the case been identified differently if those voices had been included? And then one of the ways you also often see, because lawyers are trained also to do this, how is one narrative being used to trivialize another or to overcome another? And those things all matter as you're reading it, and reading things with a questioning, critical mind.
So another thing I want to think about is, the place where you work, the place where you engage with people. You're all becoming attorneys, so really you're joining this culture of attorneys and the place where you are actually employed. So when you are in the workplace and considering practices and policies in your workplace, ask yourself these questions as you consider whether they reinforce racism or they are anti-racist. What unexamined cultural beliefs and assumptions underlie the policies and practice in the workplace? Do these assumptions disadvantage particular groups and advantage others based on race? With an understanding, of course, of race as related not only to physical characteristics, but also performance identity. So do policies create an expectation that individuals, in order to get ahead, perform whiteness, right? How am I positioned, right, as an anti-racist lawyer due to my own racial status and or other identities to raise these types of issues and work to change them within the actual workplace?
That's great. If we can get the other slide too, so that anyone who's trying to take notes can see that would be awesome. The next slide, quickly. So we hope that we'll just show this for a second, and we hope that we'll give everybody time to turn on their pictures so we can see your lovely faces, because we're about to engage in discussion. And our first hypothetical is a long one. It involves a firm, right? So we have Tyrone and Becky. Actually, it's actually Tyrone and Becky are mid-level associates at a prestigious large law firm in a large Midwestern city. At the law firm, all lawyers are expected to wear formal business attire on each day of the work week, except for Friday. Fridays are business casual days, and the firm has not yet altered its policy to make it gender neutral or gender fluid. So from Monday through Thursday, men are expected to wear suits in neutral colors, navy blue, gray, collared long sleeve dress shirts, ties underneath their suits, dark shiny shoes with dark socks, right? And there's some informal codes. There's always unwritten rules as well. Short, neat, conservative hairstyles are preferred. Women are expected to wear a pantsuit or a skirt suit, and a skirt suit that at least comes to the top of their knees, with a business blouse underneath if needed, and closed-toe shoes, dark socks where necessary if they're wearing a pantsuit. As part of the unwritten code, business blouses are not expected to be too low cut. Makeup and jewelry is supposed to be minimal, no dangling earrings. On Fridays, the dress expectations are more relaxed. On Fridays, men can wear casual slacks or khakis, a sports coat and a collared dress shirt, or a short sleeve shirt, or a golf shirt, or sweater. But men are discouraged from ever wearing jeans, sweatpants, or t-shirts. A casual dress shoe like Rockport shoes are acceptable, but tennis shoes and non-dressy sandals like Birkenstocks or Kings are highly discouraged. For women, on casual Fridays, we're talking about a nice dress, but not a dress with a halter top or spaghetti straps, or slacks and khakis or linen blends with lightweight sweaters like cardigans, blouses, dressy knit tops, and collared polo t-shirts. Women, however, are discouraged just from wearing jeans, sweatpants, t-shirts. A casual dress shoe could even be open-toed on Fridays, but no tennis shoes or non-dressy sandals. And for all employees, it simply said that their hair is to be clean and neatly groomed. Now, Tyrone is a white, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied man. He's a rising star at the law firm. He generally follows a dress code, but he occasionally likes to add some flair to his attire with bright-colored collared shirts and ties, and maybe even some eye-catching socks. He wears his blonde hair in a long curtain hairstyle. Think Keanu Reeves in Something's Gotta Give, only with blonde hair. On casual Fridays, he follows the rules for the most part, but he more frequently tests the waters. sometimes the dapper and handsome Tyrone will wear a sports coat with a t-shirt and jeans. So think Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas in Miami Vice. So we're clearly aging ourselves right now, or I'm aging myself right now. Tyrone frequently receives praise for his style, however, particularly for his more daring style choices. And so we'll move to the next part of this hypo. His best friend is in the whole world and in the firm is Becky, an African-American, cisgender, able-bodied femme lesbian. Like Tyrone, Becky is a rising star in the firm, and she's movie star gorgeous. And also like her buddy, she's a fashionista, and she started her days at the firm with a similar taste for dress code risk. But she ultimately decided to steer clear of them because her first attempt at taking some risk went disastrously. On that day, it was a Thursday, she decided to wear a conservative work dress from the Badgley Mishka collection. But Bobby, a white woman partner whom both she and Tyrone loved working for, had a moment of panic when she saw Becky. And she said, oh my goodness, she panicked. She thought, is it Friday? I thought, oh my gosh, I missed a deadline. Because she saw Becky in this slightly off-topic work outfit. And when Becky finally calmed her down to explain that it was just Thursday, Bobby remarked in a perturbed, though relieved voice, oh, I was looking at your clothes and thought, never mind, and she walked away. After that, Becky even stopped dressing casually on Fridays until Tyrone convinced her otherwise. And after a while, though, she got also sick of straightening her hair out every morning with heat and decided to get box braids. Think Beyonce in formation, but shorter braids. Are we getting younger yet? This past casual Friday, she walked into work with a beautiful African print dress from the Kayla K collection, her box braids flowing down halfway on her back, and Paul, an African-American partner at the firm, asked to meet with her. He spoke with her about her hairstyle, asking her if she felt it was professional. He noted that other partners had mentioned she seemed to be smiling less and that they were feeling less comfortable being around her. She'd had her box braids for about 2 months. Paul also said he wanted to give her advice as an elder, stating that while the cut of her dress is professional, the bright colors and patterns are not as well received. And Becky then begins to recall comments she's received when she's worn other dresses from the Kayla K or Zuri collection on Friday, and about her hair over the past 2 months. And when Becky finally tells Tyrone this news later that afternoon, he's livid. He thinks back to other slides she's told him about. In fact, that Friday, his long hair is tousled and uncombed, and he's wearing jeans and a collared t-shirt with a bright white and very clean Adidas tennis shoes, and not one person has said a word to him. And plus, he also thinking, gosh, Becky bills more hours than me each year, and the deals that she's worked on have brought in more money. So one of the questions is, what do we think? Do we think the differences between the treatment of Tyrone and Becky are due to race? We describe them as race-related. No takers? Do we think they're due to race? Chelsea Frankel, I see Chelsea.
I would say it's definitely due to race. Potentially also gender, but certainly more related to race, I would say, than anything else. And that's like clearly shown by the fact that Tyrone hasn't had any enforcement on his behaviors, I would say.
So one of the ways that we're looking at various different kinds of evidence, and one of the things that we're looking at how is she treated compared to her most obvious comparator. One of them would be Tyrone, who writes same year, same friend, working in the same firm, working in the same group. His experience is different. He's flouting the rule. She's actually much more careful. She's actually abiding by them, falling within them, and yet she's having a different response than he is. What are some other reasons why we might think it's race, or you can argue that it's not about race? All right, Nathan.
I think it would be instructive if there was I know this is a hypo, but if we could find another woman who was white and compare her treatment, especially if she's behaving similarly to Tyrone, and see it, and then that would perhaps give us more information about if it was race or gender related. It seems to be one or the other.
All right. So one of the questions is, is it race or gender, right? And so one question is this is perfect. I mean, you said this, but how, is this race or gender? We find another woman and see a white woman or a woman who's non-Black and see, is her experience different? And is she flouting the rules as well, but not also not receiving comments as well? That might give us more of a sense about whether it's race or gender, or whether there's something else going on as well. So do people see their raise hand function? Either you can do the raise hand function, or you could shout out. Either way, I guess it's instruction. Yeah, the raise hand function. Then Michael Whiteman, Professor Whiteman, can call on you, or you can shout out either way.
So Patrick Higgins has his hand up.
I think there's some value also looking at the folks in power that are making the comments and enforcing some of these perceived rules or otherwise, and specifically how they might come down on folks that are non-white and even various genders otherwise. So that's a helpful perspective as well.
Yeah, important to look at the folks in power and how are they responding. Does it matter here, right? So in both cases, we have about responses. In one case, it's a white person, it's a white woman. In another case, it's an African American man, right? Right. So does it matter? How does that play into? Why does that matter? Or does it? It doesn't matter. How do we analyze it?
So Chelsea Frankel.
I guess that point or that last fact that you mentioned also touches on misogynoir, which is a specific type of racism that impacts Black women, both as women and as Black people. I think that could also be a reason why it doesn't matter that one of the supervisors was Black in terms of determining whether or not it was about race or not. It still can be, because misogynoir is an aspect of racism.
And one of the questions, going back to Nathan's, right, it could be that it's race discrimination or gender discrimination, but it could also be that it's an intersectional type of race and gender discrimination, right? Intersectionality, all right, or misogynoir that's involved here, right? And so it could be complicated. So one of the things we also want people is that how people experience discrimination may differ depending upon the intersection of their identities, right? The ways in which women of color, right, might experience discrimination in the workplace might very much differ from the ways in which men of color experience discrimination in the workplace, right? Are there other comments? And we'll come back to what we think the answers are to each of the questions. But let's get through all of them. Now Tyrone is upset, right? He sees that there's differences in treatments between himself and his friend Becky. And what are the steps? If you're Tyrone, what do you want to do? Can you take any steps? What do you do? And you're an anti-racist lawyer.
So Jerry, sorry, I'm probably going to massacre your last name. Muir.
Sure. I'd love to give space to the students here, though. But just jumping in, and also giving thanks to Onwuachi-Willig, Dean Pita, Loor, Professor Gonzales Rose. I'm so grateful for the conversation. But I do feel like first, any ally or any good friend starts with empowering their friend. She's the one who's being affected right now, and I would question if there's not also homosexual stereotypes, the impact of wealth, and the fear of firms not to have access to wealth by not conforming to a very defined thing, as well as race and misogyny in play. But first off, I would be looking at, what does Becky need? Where's her strength? How is she being empowered? What response is she looking for? Because many a good intended helper has caused more harm by plowing over somebody else. So starting with her, and then looking at one, how do you empower the individual? And then how do you challenge the system? And taking steps to the system after first empowering the individual. But I know that there's some people on here with better insights than mine. And so if they want to add in, yeah, Melissa Morel, I saw you smile. You know it's you. And Anna, I'll just say. But otherwise, thank you everyone for the conversation.
Really important point. That another important point, if you read How to Be an Anti-Racist, right? And what it means to be anti-racist also means, right? Again, I'm glad you also brought in too, there are other intersectional identities going on as well too. That remember, she's a lesbian as well, right? Right. So there are various intersections going on here, and these are all very, very complicated. And the other thing is the performance of one's identity too in the workplace and how she's performing, right? Performing the identity. But what it means to be anti-racist, it also means to be anti-other things. That being anti-racist also means being anti-sexist. It also means being anti-homophobic, right? All of those things, right? And in part because you're anti-racist, everybody with all of those identities is also part of you know, the groups that are affected most directly and harmfully by racism as well. And then what should Becky do? Are there any steps that Becky should do to address her? She could do to try to address her situation?
I know it's very difficult in the moment as you're the person going through the experience, especially I found the part about her hair extremely troubling, and I think it's very difficult to imagine that in that moment you would have a pushback response. But I think something that Becky could do is in that moment when she's getting the burden put on her to explain why her hair is unprofessional, which in fact it's not, and she's just being asked, like, don't you think that it's unprofessional? Or having sort of that put on her. And I think something that she could do in that moment is push back and be like, well, why don't you tell me why this is even a conversation? Why do you think it's unprofessional, or why are you asking me that in the moment? And while that may not get to sort of policy changes on how hair types are described in the manual, which would obviously need to be addressed, I think it really puts a microscope on the person asking the questions and in power, and with the privilege of not making it more hurtful for the person going through the experience.
Yeah, right? Yeah, right. So she could really use this as an opportunity to begin to ask, right? She can turn on the partner, right? They share an identity, right? And he said to her, I'm speaking to you as an elder wanting to give you advice. And she can say, look, I am grateful for all that you have done. You have paved the way for me, right? You have, in this firm, you have been, you know, whatever you've done for me, right? You've guided me, you've mentored me, right? But I mean, I respect that you're trying to help me right now. But one of the things is, you know that one of the things that might be going on is that people might be viewing me as more angry. Maybe they're thinking I'm smiling less. I'm not smiling any less than I was before, because now I have a hairstyle that they associate with Blackness, and it's explained because you have this shared identity. And he's come saying, I know you know what I know, and how do you think we can work together to begin to educate people so they can change their minds, and I can be my authentic self and be happy in this place and be in the same seat that you're in, right? Eventually, because that's where we both want us to be. That's her goal. But use that as shared identity and turn it back into him. Ask him, do you? I'm assuming you don't agree. You're telling me, you're giving me this advice. I'm assuming you don't agree, but how can we work together to begin to change their minds? Are there any more comments? So real quickly, because we want to try to at least get to something else, but we do, this is a race, right? One of the things that we know about race is defined by a variety of features, social construction. Hair, if you look at old racial trials, was considered to be one of the defining features in racial trials. And it was considered, in fact, to be the thing that would always give somebody away. If their skin color was so light that they could pass for white, that the hair would give them away in some ways. But hair is one of those defining features. So race is complex, defined by so many different things, but we know that there's race operating here in part because of the hair comment, in part because of the reactions to her clothing. And all those things are tied to also identity performance. How do I expect you to perform your identity in the workplace? I want Black people in the workplace, but I don't want them to be too Black, right? And when you're wearing your African-inspired clothing and when you're wearing your hair in braids, you're reminding me too much that you're Black, right? And I want, I want the color, but not necessarily all those other things, right? And so if you want to read a great book that talks about that, Devin Carvalho and Mita Gulati's have great work on that. Their book, White, laid some of this work out as well. And Tyrone, as somebody who's speaking, he has other people's ears and he can begin to talk. Maybe he talks quietly to a partner he trusts or someone he has a good relationship with about what's concerning him. So we'll move on to our next hypo.
Can we have, excellent. Thank you so much, Michael. Next slide, maybe. Okay. All right. So here we go. Next, is that, can I have Hypo 2 actually? Yes. Thank you. So the Hypo 2, we're going to talk about a convenience shop owner. So you are an attorney and you are reviewing the store policies of a shop owner who wants to ensure he is doing everything by the book. The owner is Ramiro. He lives in the same neighborhood where the shop is located. The majority of the neighborhood residents are Black and brown people. The neighborhood is in a highly policed area. Your client's business is very important to him, and so is his neighborhood. He has owned the store for 15 years, and though he is very comfortable, he relies on the income to support his nuclear and extended family. As you review his shop handbook, you read about his policy regarding the use of counterfeit bills. Ramiro instituted a policy after encountering the use of counterfeit bills occasionally at his store. He tells you that sometimes the cashiers at the store fail to catch the counterfeit bills and they slip through, but usually the store owner or the cashiers are able to ferret out a counterfeit bill, inform the customer that it is counterfeit, and prevent it from being used in the store. Ramiro tells you that he does not know whether the customers are aware that they are using a counterfeit bill, but he has adopted and applied a zero tolerance policy towards the use of such bills in the past 10 years. Under this policy, his cashiers are required to call the police every time someone attempts to use a counterfeit bill in the store. In most cases, the customer is long gone by the time the police have arrived, but not every time. While the shop owner has not lost any money due to the use of counterfeit bill, he enforces this policy calling the police each time because he feels it is his duty to send a strong message and to discourage others from trying to use counterfeit bills in his and other stores in the area in his neighborhood. So here's your question as the lawyer. Your client feels that he is legally justified in calling the police and asks whether he should be doing anything in addition. You know that most of the shop's customers are people of color based on the neighborhood and based on prior conversations that you've had with Ramiro. You know that statistically, police are more likely to engage violently with Black and brown people in street encounters and are more likely to use discretion unfavorably against people of color. You are committed to being an anti-racist lawyer. How do you advise the client? So maybe I'll just start with another question, and then we'll get back to that question of how you advise the client. And I know we have limited time. So is the shop owner's conduct, or policy rather, is the shop's policy a racist policy?
So Marcus Hyde has his hand up.
Marcus.
Yeah, so I just want to say that it doesn't really matter if the shop owner intends it to be a racist policy. If it produces racist results,
okay.
Then yes, it's a racist policy.
Okay, so Marcus, I'm really interested in that difference between sort of intent versus results, because some people really focus on that difference. In other words, the intent is not racist, right? But you are saying that the way that you would look at it is you would focus on the results. Tell me about why you make that choice.
Well, I think also going back to the old scenario, the other hypothetical, people aren't going to admit that they have racist ideas 9 out of 10 times, or probably more than that. And so I think if we're limited to when people are willing to fess up to their own racism, or be critical enough with themselves or honest enough with themselves to see how they're complicit in white supremacy, then we're never going to get anywhere. Yeah. Is that simple enough?
Yes. No, that's great. Thank you so much for talking about that. Okay. So how could the shop owner, right, or how could the policy instead look like an anti-racist policy? And also raise your hand, by the way, if you disagree with sort of the focus of the intent versus the result, right? Michael, do we have someone?
We do not. Now, Melissa Morale.
Yes, Melissa. Hi, Melissa.
Hello.
Hi.
I would say that removing the police involvement altogether from this policy is one of the simplest ways of sort of targeting the root of why this policy ends up being racist, and following Marcus's commentary, focus on the effect. And I think beyond just talking to the client and convincing them of removing that part of it, I think it's getting to the root of the conversation of why does Ramiro feel like this is a necessary part of the policy for him to nonetheless be or have zero tolerance. He can still have zero tolerance in the process of not accepting the counterfeit bills in his store, but not necessarily to the additional step of calling the police every time, especially as highlighted in the hypo that the person is there or not there, and just that simple police encounter is gonna turn into a different situation depending on the person that's caught with the bill. And I mean, we've seen this in real life this summer, so I think this hypo is sort of right on point in that regard. So I think deeper than just eliminating the police interaction altogether, it's having a conversation with Ramiro about why he thinks that the police is the correct body to really be ensuring that the neighborhood businesses aren't getting affected by counterfeit bills.
Okay, so let's talk. Perfect. So somebody else besides Melissa, or I can follow up with another question. I'm sorry?
Sorry, Tracy Baker.
Tracy.
Hi. I guess for me, and I obviously don't have the hypo back in front of me, but I'm wondering what is his intent, right? So there's part of the hypo that says that he relies on the income for supporting his family. Yeah. And so obviously he's motivated by not getting counterfeit bills because that impacts that. But then there's a part of the hypo that says that he wants to make a point. Right. About discouraging people and sending a strong message, which is entirely divorced from the income issue. So for me, I'm wondering what his true intent is, because a lot of times these small business owners in these Black and brown neighborhoods, they're faced with these dual motivations. Obviously, they want to protect their income, but they also have been conditioned, like many of us, to believe certain things about Black and brown people. So, so he's sort of, he has conflicting interests within himself. That's the first thing. The second thing is that his employees most likely are local cashiers, and they're putting them in the position of, competing interests as well, because a lot of them may be, friends and family who live in a neighborhood. I'm pretty sure the local cashiers are not from some other neighborhood and coming to this neighborhood to work as a cashier. So I'm just, that just goes to show how a lot of times, given that he lives in this neighborhood, he's a small business owner in this neighborhood, he has economic interests, but he's also sort of upholding the supremacy because of the stereotypes he's been taught. If he didn't intend on, and I think that the calling of the police, demonstrates to me at least that it's more about sending the message. It's a highly policed area. He knows the police are around and that sort of thing. He's really concerned about the income. For me, the police are no more able to discern a counterfeit bill than you or I, or maybe even a cashier. And it seems to me that that's a federal issue. So you can call the FBI. There's a number of other things that you can do than to call the police. So I'm wondering about competing interests, economics. There's a number of things that play here for me. So that's this. I don't have an answer, obviously, but those are the things that stand out for me in wondering
Tracy.
what's going on, right?
Yeah, so that's great. And I see we're running out of time. So I mean, just a couple of things that before we end, I just want to say that I thought was really interesting based on your comments, right? So what I think I actually didn't say on this hypo, right? But maybe you could, maybe you could make assumptions based on the name, is that Ramiro is a Latinx man, right? So I thought it was really interesting that the way that you talked about, right, that, and also reminds me of the partner that our dean was talking about in the last hypo, right? That, people are conditioned, right? And I love that language that you use, that people are conditioned to believe these stereotypes, right? And the fact that you are a person of color does not prevent you from having that conditioning affect you, right? So I think that that's interesting. There's been a lot of work done on police officers of color, for example. So I think that's really interesting. The next question that I would ask you, if we have time, but I think we don't, but maybe, are you a BU student?
No, I'm not. I'm at Delaware Law in Wilmington, Delaware.
Okay.
And I'm part-time, so I'm still learning.
Oh, no, that's great. You're awesome. So I was thinking that, I would want to know what you thought about this, which is my next question, right? Which maybe we're not going to get to, which is the point of, okay, so you're an attorney, and as an attorney, you need to be client-centered, right? You need to be client-centered. So but you want, as an anti-racist attorney, you want this not to be the policy, right? Because you think, for example, you, Tracy, think the police need to be taken out of that, right? Like the police are not a necessary part of that. So I would be really interested to know how you engage with your, with the shop owner to sort of get to something that is meeting, his needs, his goals as a client, but that still can, that and that he will consider changing the policy, right? Because he feels he's doing the right thing, he's calling the cops, he's doing things by the book, and then sort of what you have really insightfully pointed out is what really are his motives, right? Which is really, really interesting.
I mean, I think definitely, it's really about determining what his motives are. When clients come to us, I would imagine that they want to accomplish something, be it money damages, be it injunction, be it whatever it is, right? So, for me, I would want to find that out. I'm a IT professional by training, so this is a completely different field for me, a second career. And I have a business process background, so I'm always looking at outcomes. I'm always looking at what are we trying to accomplish and what are the requirements, right? Because it's information technology, you have to be very specific about what it is that you're trying to get to and how you can effectuate that outcome. So for me, in approaching it from a business process perspective, in talking to the client, that's why the motivation jumped out for me. Are you talking economics or are you talking sending a message? What exactly are you trying to accomplish? And once we get to that, then we can sort of work back from a process that meets that goal.
Great. So I just want to say, Tracy, you have great instincts. Yeah. So I think we're out of time.
We're out of time. One thing I want to say about thank you all for coming, but one thing I want to say is that last hypo was really inspired by, of course, the murder of George Floyd and the actual scenario. There are some facts that are changing here, but this was the store owner in this case had a policy of calling the police in every occasion and said, I really care about the community and in most cases people don't even know they have a counterfeit bill, and in most cases people are gone, and so then you begin to think about, right, what were you trying to achieve, and how do you talk to them about what they're trying to achieve in that policy, and how do you construct a policy that serves what they're trying to achieve in terms of caring about their community and wanting to do something right, that without engaging the police in a way that results in obviously the death, the really horrific death of one person. But thank you so much for coming. We're excited about all the future lawyers. We're excited about all the work that you're going to do, changing the world, and we are glad to follow you as you do it. And so we hope that we have given you a few lessons that you might find helpful in that work. And we're grateful that you showed up.